Real people, real confessions, the stories you weren't supposed to hear. Welcome to Beyond Reddit Stories. I can still remember the way her voice sounded that night, casual, almost bored, as if she was commenting on the weather. We were sitting in the living room, half watching some rerun on TV, the glow from the screen flickering across her face. Out of nowhere, my sister turned to me, smirked, and said, "You know you were an accident, right?" She didn't even blink. She just looked back at the TV, leaving me frozen in place, my mind scrambling to process what she'd just dropped into the air like a lit match in a dark room. At first, I laughed, thinking it was one of her weird attempts at humor. We'd always had that sibling dynamic, teasing, sarcastic, pushing each other's buttons just to see what would happen. But this didn't feel like a joke. There was no playful grin, no dramatic wink, just nothing. My heart started to race. I felt that sudden, irrational heat in my cheeks, the kind you get when you hear something that cuts a little too deep. I wanted to say something back, anything, but the words stuck in my throat. An accident. I tried to brush it off, told myself she was just being her usual dramatic self. But as the show kept playing and she didn't mention it again, a strange unease settled over me. I kept glancing at her, looking for some sign that she'd made it up, that she'd break into laughter and tell me not to be so sensitive. It never came. That night, as I lay in bed, her words echoed in my head over and over, louder than the sound of my own breathing. I thought about the way she'd said it so casually, so confidently, and I realized something that made my stomach turn. You can only say something like that if you truly believe it. And if she believed it, maybe it was true. I had no idea then that this tiny sentence, 7 words, would be the thread I'd start pulling on. And once I pulled, the whole fabric of my life, my family, and everything I thought I knew about myself would start to unravel. Before that night, if you'd asked me to describe my family, I would have told you we were normal, maybe a little quieter than most, maybe a little private, but nothing out of the ordinary. We lived in a modest 2-story house at the edge of town, with a small maple tree in the front yard that turned the brightest red in the fall. My mom kept the kitchen spotless. My dad mowed the lawn every Saturday, and our dog, Max, always managed to shed enough fur to keep the vacuum running daily. I was the youngest, with my sister 3 years ahead of me. She was the loud one, the confident one, the kind of person who could walk into a room and somehow own it without even trying. I was not like that, more reserved, always the one hanging back, letting her take the spotlight while I stayed in the corners, watching and listening. Childhood, at least in my memory, was a series of snapshots. Family dinners where Dad would tell the same joke over and over until Mom rolled her eyes. Birthdays with lopsided cakes that somehow tasted better because they were homemade. Summer trips to the lake where my sister and I would argue over who got the better floaty. Little things that, at the time, I thought made us unshakable. But looking back, there were cracks, tiny, hairline fractures in the picture I carried in my head. I remember overhearing my aunt once, talking in a low voice to my mother in the kitchen. I couldn't catch every word, but I remember the phrase wasn't supposed to happen drifting through the doorway before the sound of clinking teacups drowned out the rest. I remember family friends asking my parents if they planned to have more kids after my sister, and my mom always laughing awkwardly, her eyes darting away as she answered. I told myself those were nothing, just grown-up conversations I didn't understand. But even as a kid, I could feel it, a subtle difference in the way my parents treated us. My sister was the golden child, straight-A student, athlete, the one they bragged about at barbecues. I was different. They loved me. I never doubted that. But sometimes it felt like their love for me had an edge to it, a hesitation, as if they were holding something back. Still, I never questioned it too deeply. That was just my life. That was just our family. We didn't talk much about feelings or history. We just kept moving forward. I learned early on not to dig too far into things, because in our house, asking too many questions usually got you a polite smile and a change of subject. So I grew up thinking I was exactly where I was meant to be, that I belonged, that everything had a reason, even if I didn't see it. Until my sister dropped those 7 words and suddenly, all those tiny cracks in my memory didn't seem so harmless anymore. In the days after my sister's comment, I tried to let it go, I really did, but it was like a splinter lodged under my skin, too small to cripple me, but impossible to ignore. Every time I saw my parents, I caught myself studying their faces, their expressions, searching for any sign that something was off. It started with little things. I found myself lingering in the hallway when my mom was on the phone, hoping to overhear a snippet of conversation that might explain anything. I started replaying memories in my head like old VHS tapes, pausing and zooming in on details I'd once thought were meaningless. The more I thought about it, the more I noticed how tightly my family controlled its narrative. We had photo albums for every milestone: my sister's first day of school, her piano recitals, her track meets, but when I flipped through them, there were gaps in mine. My early years section was oddly thin, as if I hadn't existed until kindergarten. Then one afternoon, the curiosity became too much. My parents were out, mom at a book club, dad running errands, and I wandered into the attic under the pretense of looking for some old board games. The attic was exactly how I remembered it: cramped, dusty, filled with boxes labeled in mom's neat handwriting: Christmas, winter clothes, school papers, and then, shoved in the corner, one simply marked MISC. I don't know what made me open it, but the moment I did, my pulse kicked into overdrive. Inside were stacks of old documents: tax forms, letters, hospital bills. It felt invasive, like reading someone's diary, but I couldn't stop. And that's when I saw it: a thin manila folder with my full name written in black ink. I sat cross-legged on the attic floor and opened it, my hands trembling. Inside were my birth certificate, some vaccination records, and then a set of hospital papers I'd never seen before. The date was 3 months earlier than my birthday. The words "unplanned pregnancy" were typed neatly in the notes section. My mother's name was there, her signature too, alongside something that made my throat close up: a box checked next to discuss termination options. For a long moment, I just stared at it, my brain unable to process what I was reading. I wasn't just unplanned. I had been debated, considered. My very existence had been a question on a checklist. Footsteps creaked downstairs, snapping me out of my trance. My sister's voice called up, asking what I was doing. I stuffed the papers back in the folder, shoved it into the box, and scrambled down before she could come up. That night, I couldn't sleep. The words from the paper blurred with my sister's voice in my head, playing over and over like a broken record. I wasn't ready to confront my parents, not yet, but I knew I couldn't pretend I hadn't seen it. The next day, I decided to test the waters. Over breakfast, I casually asked my mom about the day I was born, hoping she'd launch into one of those sentimental stories. Instead, she froze for half a second, barely noticeable, but enough, and said, "It was a long time ago. Why do you ask?" Then she smiled, that polite, practiced smile that always meant, "Drop it." But I couldn't drop it, not anymore. I realized then that finding the truth wasn't going to be easy. In my family, silence wasn't just a habit, it was a fortress, and I was about to start chipping away at it. It didn't take long for my sister to notice something was different about me. I was quieter, more distracted. At first, she made jokes about me finally hitting puberty late. But one night, as we were both in the kitchen making tea, she leaned against the counter and said, "You found something, didn't you?" I froze, my hand halfway to the sugar jar. She smirked. But it wasn't a playful smirk. It was the kind you give when you already know the answer. I went into the attic. I said slowly, "I found papers." Her expression shifted, just for a second, into something I'd never seen on her before, a flicker of guilt. "So now you know," she said quietly. "What exactly am I supposed to know?" I demanded. She hesitated, then exhaled sharply. "When I was about 10, I overheard Mom and Dad fighting. Mom was crying. Dad was yelling. They said they weren't ready for another kid, that you weren't part of the plan. I didn't know if it was true, so I never told you, until I did." Her words hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't just her comment anymore. It was the confirmation that she'd been carrying this knowledge for years, and she'd chosen to weaponize it that night. I wanted to scream, to accuse her, to ask her why, but deep down, I knew this wasn't really about her. The truth I needed wasn't in her mouth, it was in my parents. So the next evening, I went to my mom. I asked her point blank if I had been an accident. At first, she gave me the same polite smile, the same, "Why do you ask?" deflection, but I didn't let it go this time. My voice shook, but I pushed forward. I found the hospital papers. I saw what they said. Her eyes filled instantly. She sat down at the kitchen table, gesturing for me to join her. "It's true," she whispered. "You weren't planned. I was in the middle of a promotion at work. Your dad and we weren't in a good place. When I found out I was pregnant, I panicked. We both did." Her hands twisted the hem of her sweater. "We considered other options. For weeks, I went back and forth. I told myself we couldn't handle another child, that it wasn't the right time, that your sister deserved all our focus." But then she stopped, her voice breaking. I leaned in, my heart pounding. "Then what?" She looked up, eyes wet, and said the last thing I expected. "Then your grandmother died. And at her funeral, I realized how short life is, how much love we lose when we think we can control everything. I decided that if you were meant to be here, I wouldn't stop it. And from that moment, I never looked back." I sat there in silence, torn between devastation and something else, gratitude, maybe. It was strange knowing I was almost never born, yet also knowing that the decision to have me had been a deliberate act of love in the end. But then came the twist I didn't see coming. My mother reached across the table, gripped my hand, and said, "There's more. Your father, he didn't want me to tell you this, but the reason he didn't want another child was because, before you, we had lost one, a son. He was stillborn. Your sister knows, but we never told you. We were afraid it would change the way you saw us." The room spun. Suddenly, everything made sense: the hesitations, the silences, the way they seemed overprotective yet distant at the same time. I wasn't just unplanned, I was a reminder both of loss and of survival. My mother's tears spilled over as she whispered, "You weren't supposed to happen, but you saved me. I didn't know how much I needed you until you were here." I didn't know whether to cry, scream, or collapse into her arms. In that moment, all the anger, confusion, and hurt twisted into something I couldn't name: a messy, aching kind of love. In the days after that conversation with my mother, something in me shifted. The questions didn't vanish, but the weight they carried began to change. I no longer looked at myself as some cosmic mistake drifting through life. I saw myself as the choice my mother made when she could have chosen differently. That realization felt powerful. I started noticing the small ways my parents had shown their love. All along the way, my dad would fix my bike without me asking. The way my mom kept every terrible drawing I'd ever made. The way my sister, despite everything, still saved me the last piece of cake on my birthday. It didn't erase the hurt, but it reframed it. I began to understand that family isn't perfect. It's messy, it's full of secrets and decisions we can't undo. But it's also full of second chances, and the choice to stay, even when it's hard. One evening, my sister came into my room. She sat on the edge of my bed and said, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to hurt you that much. I was jealous. You've always been the center of Mom and Dad's world, and I guess I thought reminding you that you weren't planned would make me feel better, but it didn't. It just made me feel worse." It wasn't a perfect apology, but it was real, and I realized I wanted to forgive her, not for her sake, but for mine. Now, when I think about the hospital papers in that dusty attic, I don't see a label of rejection anymore. I see the beginning of a story where a scared young woman chose to take a leap of faith, and where I became living proof that even the most unexpected arrivals can turn into the greatest blessings. If there's anything I've learned, it's this: you don't get to choose how your story starts, but you do get to choose how it's written from here on out. That's my story. A sentence thrown out in the middle of an ordinary night changed the way I saw myself, and almost broke me until I realized the truth was never meant to define my worth. If you've ever discovered something about your family that shook your world, or if you've ever been told you were a mistake, I hope you remember this: you're not an accident. You're a decision someone made, whether in fear, hope, or love, and you're here for a reason. I'd love to hear your story. What's the biggest family secret you've ever uncovered? Or maybe it's something small but unforgettable. Share it in the comments, I promise. You're not the only one who's been there. And if this story stayed with you, even just a little, I'd be grateful if you'd subscribe, so we can keep telling the kind of stories that remind us we're never truly alone. Because somewhere out there, someone might be waiting to hear yours.